In this video, we're going to talk about space planning. So it's a process in which we lay out the spaces of our residence in context to one another, following building code requirements, information from our site analysis, and other critical information that we use to begin to develop our floor plan. And so we generally do that in the beginning by doing something that is known as bubble diagramming. So one of the things we need to consider is room relationships. Does the bathroom need to be near the bedrooms? Does it need to be near the living room? Does it need to be near the dining room? What are the requirements for those spatial relationships of the rooms? Do we want the pantry to be near the kitchen? Do we want it to be in the kitchen? Do we want it to be in the garage? What size is the pantry? Does the front door need to be in the living room? So the questions that we want to find out in the beginning of the process by interviewing our clients, and then to learn and then to be able to understand the relationships between these rooms is a very, very important aspect to the design process. There are zones. Zone 1 is privacy. Zone 2 is more public. Or, I'm sorry. Zone 1 and Zone 2 are more public. They are where people gather, people are awake, they're doing things, watching television, eating. Zone 3 is private, which is more like sleeping, study, those types of activities. And then Zone 4 are utility areas, and those areas may be combined or adjacent to the eating and family activity areas. And so as you can see, what that has happened is those are then broken into large zones. So we can start with this overall zone of where we want what we want to cluster in our rooms. And we want to do that because, if people are in the living room having a party or celebrating or doing something loud and talking, we don't want that to be next to the bedrooms where maybe kids are trying to sleep. And so that's why we create these zones so that we can separate the private and the public spaces from one another. Also helps to start thinking about these zones in terms of massing of the plan. This is something that's a little bit more complex, and we're not going to get into this too much right now. This is something that you will end up building your models. You'll see that starting to happen. But we'll talk a little bit more about massing in subsequent conversations. Zones can also be done in levels, right? So we've got the zones that not only align with the floor plan, but they're also aligning here with what's in the basement, what's on level 1, what's on level 2, what's on level 3. Are we going to have multiple levels? Are we not? So when you're thinking about laying things out on a floor plan, which is going to tie into the schematic floor plan that you're doing for this course, you also are going to want to begin to think a little bit about how are these zones going to play out, how are they going to stack. And to make it simple for this course, we're just going to use one level. We're not going to have a basement. We're not going to have a second floor. We're just going to do a first floor. And the reason for that is it's like 3D chess to start to try to juggle these things. So we're just going to work with one floor for this project. And then as we advance, we can start talking about basements and second floors and so on. And then as we saw the original bubble diagram in the beginning, that once we know where our zones are, we can begin to lay them out in a way that starts to create these relationships. Now, I have a second video after this that's going to explain to you how I work on bubble diagrams. This is very, very loose. I like to work more on a grid because I think in the long run, working on a grid helps make it easier to go from bubbles to rooms. And ultimately, the floor, this is the original, this is where we're going. This is the original bubble diagram, and this is how it translated into rooms that were refined. This is the kind of presentation you want to show a client. This is where we're going. This is the end result. I would add color for schematic. I always add color for schematic. It helps the client understand a little bit more visually. It's a little bit visually easier to read and more pleasant. And so then you can see, here's an example of that, right? Here's a grid, laying out of a grid. We went from bubble diagram to putting rooms on a grid. Grids help, and I highly recommend you work on them. And then this is sort of the massing model. Okay, and so after we get through the bubble diagram, we're going to get in the floor plan, and we'll pick back up with this conversation here when we get to the floor plan.